Welcome. So we're talking about today called to follow Jesus together in work. So we've been talking about following Jesus together in our work. We talked about this so this is part 2. So we're going to do a quick review of what we talked about last time. We just talked about how much of your time is working. A lot of it. And how much do you love about your work? What's frustrating about your work? We acknowledged last time that it's both. There's things we love, and sometimes it's more of one than the other. And when I'm talking about work, I'm talking about all the things we do. Now we're going to focus kind of on your paid work, but there's lots of work that's not paid. Just getting food and raising kids, and when you're retired, you don't do anything after you're retired, right? Nothing to do. Just the work changes, right? There's different things that are needed to be done. And where's Jesus in all this? How do we follow Jesus in our work? Because sometimes I think we have a kind of a dualistic picture, and we're like Christians when we're at church or a Bible study, but then we go work, and that has nothing to do with it. But somehow God needs to be part of it, and following Jesus together, not just individually, but together at work. So we're called by God. I'm going to focus especially on Genesis 11 and 12, but I'm going to get a running start and go back to where we were. I'm using these 2 books, as I mentioned last time, quite a bit. I also read some of the Pope's good work on responding to AI and artificial intelligence. There's a lot of good stuff out there, so forgive me if it's too much, but in fact, we probably could do a Bible study on either one of these, or a book study, which would include the Bible. So if anybody wants to do that, let's talk about it. So one of the things Keller talks about is what is the big story, that everything has a story. You notice that when events happen, events don't just happen, they get told to us, and depending upon which friends you listen to, or which news channel, or where Google thinks you like to go, you know that Google shows you a different picture than somebody else because they're like, oh, you like this kind of thing, so I'll show you those articles. And the same things have different stories, because an event doesn't mean anything until it's put in a story. And there's a lot of different stories out there. And the story always has these things. How are things supposed to be? And some people emphasize one thing, that things are supposed to be. So what's the problem? What's the big problem? And what's the solution to the problem? Every story is that way, right? You start out things a certain way, and then there's a problem, and then the plot thickens, and it gets more complicated, and at the end it either resolves or it doesn't resolve, and how does it do that? And all of us are interpreting everything that happens through our story or some other stories that are told to us, and the Bible has a story. In fact, the Bible is one big story about the problem and what God's done about it and how things are supposed to be. So the Bible's big story is, and we're going to review this again, all things are supposed to be, all things are created very good. All people are created in the image of God. And that's not the story that every other story is about. Some stories say, well, our people are more in the image of God, and those people are less so. Or our species is higher. Or some things are good, and some things aren't. Or maybe they're even, like, for example, some people say, my mind is good, I want to do good, but my body gets in the way. That was kind of Plato's thing. So I'm this kind of person, but my body just gets in the way of that. Or other people say, actually, you don't even have a mind, will, and emotions. It's just your body giving you these thoughts, and it's just neurochemicals happening. There's different stories out there, but in Scripture, all things are created good. Plato thought material things were not good, just the spiritual things are good. Sometimes we get that idea. Well, let's be more spiritual and less physical. We're supposed to be physical. God made us that way. We're supposed to be limited. God made us that way. So what's the problem? So, for example, in the AI thing, he says, sometimes we see the problem as we're limited. And so the issue is we just need to get rid of all of our limits and become transhuman, and we just won't have any limits. We can just do stuff so fast we won't have any limits. Is that really the problem? Is limitation a problem, or is that part of how we were created? But according to Scripture, the problem is that all of it is fallen because of sin and the fall. Every nation, every individual, every corporation, every church is fallen. As well, and sin and the fall and the injustice that comes from that. And the solution is Jesus. God himself had to come and redeem it, fix it, and sacrifice himself for us because we couldn't do it ourselves. And most of our solutions are, I'm going to fix it. We're going to fix it. Somehow I or my technology or something is going to fix it. But the Bible has a different story. Just you got to steep yourself in this story so that when counterfeit bills get passed, you're like, yeah, that looks like the real thing, but not really. It's got half. All right, so last time we talked about the wonder and the weeds. So the wonder is God's image at work. Why do you want to work? You want to work because you were made to work. And yet you're not your work. You're made in God's image. Out of that, part of the thing is to work. So we talked about God was at work in creating things, making everything, and when he invites us into it, and it's all good, and God delights in his good work. And Jesus works, he delights and he rests, and we're made to work, delight, and rest. All of those things. Together, all of us together in God's image. So God had to bring together male and female. It's when we work together that we're really the image of God. Not just I individually am the image of God, but my wife and I are more in the image of God. We were more able to create than I would have been by myself. And we together as churches, corporations, families are more able to be creative than we are by ourselves. And when we are loving, we display God's image more than any of us by ourselves. So we need to work together. And God blessed all men and women with work. Work is a blessing. It's a gift. Anybody who's ever been unemployed realizes that work is a blessing. And he's given us to reign and to act on his behalf. We're in the image of God, and we're called to be like God. We work like God. We create with the gifts that he's given. He's given each of us gifts, and that's going to play into when we talk about being called, because God gives certain people gifts, natural gifts, special gifts. In fact, all of us have been gifted by God. So people who aren't Christians also have gifts from God. And then God gives spiritual gifts. Some of them, Bezalel and Bezalel, I can't remember the other guy's name. They were gifted in making things, in craftsmanship, in building a tabernacle and making it beautiful. And other gifts of teaching and prophecy and whatever talked about other places. But you were created for and blessed with work. You work as God's representative to give him glory and to bless other people. To create his image. You delight in your work with God. You can delight in your work with God, and then you can rest in God and say, it's done. If you're really resting in God and not thinking you got to do it all. And then together we honor all others as God's image. So keep in mind that other people are also God's image. Even if they're not Christians, there can also be God's image. Do you remember the Amadeus, that movie? There's this composer, and he's so frustrated because he thinks he's worked so hard, and he's a good composer. We still play his stuff, but he's frustrated to see Mozart, who he thinks is just a playboy, and he's not as holy or as good as he is, and yet God's gifted him with more musical ability that the main character can't develop. Amadeus drives him nuts because God's blessed him with greater gifts than he has, and it becomes about his pride. Anyways, it's easy for that to happen, right? But other people are gifted, and God has gifted them to bless me. And God actually has called them to bless me. And the way that God provides for me and you is through other people. Some of them are Christians, some of them aren't Christians. I mean, when I drink my milk, it doesn't just come from Aldi's. It comes from a supplier and from a farmer and from a cow. And even if the cow isn't Christian, or the farmer or the Aldi's person, it's still God's blessing to me. And actually, all the work we do is to bless each other through the various work we do. And you may think some particular work isn't important until it doesn't happen. If the garbage workers go on strike, we suddenly notice somehow that they were really important. Even if you don't pay any attention. I actually thank God for my garbage We didn't have garbage pickup in Mwanza, and it had its problems. When I drive down the roads, we didn't have great roads some of the times in Tanzania, and I'm grateful for the people who fixed the roads. It's expensive to have roads. And there's stuff that each of us do that we may not think is important or that somebody else does it. And also sometimes we get a ranking and a classification that we think certain things are more important. We pay them better, or we say, well, you went to a good school and we'll pay you a lot. That's an important work. But all of it's important. And all of it we'll talk about is God's calling as well. And we are forming and filling like Jesus, like God did in the creation. He formed it, and then he filled it. He put light and dark, and then he put stars and moon and sun, and he filled it. And he created land, and he filled it with plants and animals. And we are forming and filling along with God in creation. We're supposed to be doing that. That's the way it's supposed to be. Then God got his hands dirty, he formed people from the dust, planted a garden. He's a farmer. Blessed to work with freedom and food, and told them to watch it and take care of this place. And he created a woman to be with the man so that they could work together for the good. And they worked together with God, and there was no shame. They were in the image of God. And then we get to the frustration and the weeds. Because work isn't all beautiful, flourishing. Sometimes it's frustrating. Gardening isn't all eating juicy tomatoes. There's also those weeds. Why is work so hard? Because of our sin. That's the other part of the story. We talked about this last time. The lie, the fall, looking for beauty and wisdom, and they ended up with shame and blame. Anybody ever have any blame at work? Yeah. Not my fault. If the bosses didn't, if those people didn't, if the government didn't, all these regulations, all those red tape, lots of blame happens at work. And injustice happens, bad things, and then there's a curse on the ground, not on the people, but there's weeds that result, and work gets frustrating. Sin makes work fruitless. Sometimes we plant a good garden and we don't get anything from it, or not very much. It makes it pointless. Ecclesiastes talks about, I tried pleasure and knowledge and working hard and big projects, and in the end it didn't satisfy. The idea is that Solomon, who did everything, knew everything, and yet it was unsatisfying. Because why? It all ends at death. And you don't know if your successor is going to be helpful or not. If he's going to take that beautiful corporation you built and run it in the ground or make it an evil corporation, you don't know. And it's selfish. And it reveals our idols. So let's look at Genesis 11. Genesis 11, so in the big story, there's the creation the way it's supposed to be, Genesis 1 and 2. Then there's sin, rebellion against God, and the fall. And then we see it ramifying or spelling out. That injustice that happens there gets greater as it goes into the family, and Cain kills Abel. And then it goes into society, and society is so wicked, and every thought in their minds was evil, and there was violence, and God decides to destroy it and sends the flood. And then it goes into international or interethnic relations, interlanguage relations in the story. So it gets worse and worse as it gets bigger and bigger. The effects of sin and injustice increase. So, Genesis 11. And this is actually something that's referenced in the Pope's. I thought I should follow the Pope. He's got some good ideas. I don't follow him in everything, but I appreciate what the Catholic Church has been bringing us lately. At one time, all the people of the world spoke the same language and used the same words. A uniformity that the Babylonians thought, if everybody just speak our language, if everybody speak English, then we'd be fine. If we just had one digital language, we could get things done. This is the vision for a long time. One language used the same words. As the people migrated to the east, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia and settled there. They began saying to each other, let's make bricks and harden them with fire. In this region, bricks were used instead of stone, and tar was used for mortar. So this is a new technology of bricks, and different from Palestine, where there's lots of stones. And they can make big things, like ziggurats, multi-layer pyramids, and towers that will have a temple on top. So they're building their way to get to God, or to be God. They're going to put a temple on top. This is an idolatrous proposition. Because then they said, come, let's build a great city for ourselves. You notice the selfishness there? Oh, it's not selfish. It's for us. It's not just for me. It's for us. We're going to make us great. We're going to make us wonderful. We're going to make us great again. We're going to do the best. So build a great city for ourselves that will proclaim how wonderful we are, with a tower that reaches into the sky to God. We're going to find our own way to God. And this is actually the lie all along. Remember, the lie back in the garden was, you can be like God. And here are the lies. You can build something to get to God. And the AI lie is, or technology lies, you can conquer things and become like God. You can know everything. You can conquer. We can get past our limitations. We can live forever. We can solve all the problems by ourselves. This will make us famous. This will make our brand. This will make our nation. Everyone will love our flag. And when they worship our flag, they'll be worshiping us, the great us. They'll worship our corporation. And when they see that logo, they'll say, yes, they're a great company. And it will keep us from being scattered all over the world. So you notice there's selfishness here, and there's fear. We don't want to be scattered. If we get scattered, what happened to us? God had told them to fill the earth, but they're like, we're just going to stay here, right here, where we're comfortable, and make sure we don't get scattered. And then there's the pride of, we're going to make a name for ourselves. Of course, I'm working on this, but it's a big project. And here's the thing. You may not be serving yourself, but you're serving the corporation, the nation, the church, whatever the big project is that's going to make a big name for ourselves. You following me? And this is a successful project. They're doing it. They're achieving it. And our technology, we're achieving some amazing things. Is it good? That's a different question than whether we're successful. Right? You can make something successful, efficient, effective, and it can be evil. Maybe it can be neutral. Neutral's hard to find. Or it can be good. Or it can definitely be a mix. So God came down. Of course, this is, of course, the image. They're building this up to God, and they're going to be right up there with God and tell him what to do. And God's like, came down and was like, oh, what are they doing down there? Huh. That's the image. To see what they're saying, look, the people are united. They all speak the same language. After this, nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them. Come, let's go down and confuse the people with different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other. So God sees that if they do this idolatrous, selfish, prideful project, it's going to make things worse. So he helps by giving limitations. But really what happens is they stop listening to each other. That's not the way we're going to do it. I know better. They stop hearing each other is the implication in it. And this is where we all tend to fail in our relationships between each other from different nations, from different ethnicities, from different languages. I mean, if you all would just speak English in my accent, we could understand each other. I don't have to learn your language because, well, we're dominant. And I speak the Queen's English. So the Queen's English, here's a classic example. I was in Tanzania 40 years ago. And we had a couple of British VSO workers and a Peace Corps worker who happened to come in, and we were having a good time. The only time I had other young adults, I was by myself. And there was another Tanzanian there, and they were always arguing back and forth about British English versus American English and which was better. And finally I said, listen, you guys. I said, Jared, how many languages do you speak? And he said, oh, well, Kiswahili, Kirundi, English. He had about 5. And I'm like, you see, you guys, we don't even know another language. And the person said, well, if you speak proper English, you don't need to know another language. There it is. And Americans are even more of that opinion than British people. And that's what's happening here. They don't want to understand each other. So in that way, the Lord scattered them all over the world. They stopped building the city. That's why the city was called Babel, because that's where the Lord confused the people with different languages. This way, he scattered them all over the world. So God judges and limits this because they're off on a successful, idolatrous, selfish, prideful project. Isn't God gracious? And he also judges. So then, there's 2 stories here about how we got all of the different languages. One is the positive story. You know, Noah had kids, and those kids had kids, and those kids had kids, and they all became different nations. That's the positive story. The negative story is this one. We stopped listening to each other, and so we got more and more insular in our ethnicity, our language, our way of doing things. Okay. We talked about this last time. We have invasive species. That's my yard. There's a rabbit there who, if you would just eat clover, would be fine. Anyways, if you'd eat all those invasive species, that'd be even better. But there's invasive species that have ruined the garden. And I mentioned that's the Japanese beetle grub, who is a great delicacy for the raccoons that come out of the sewer, and they've plowed up my yard. But part of our job is to redeem that work from all the weeds. And so God calls us to participate with him in the redeeming work. So working with God to restore creation is part of what our job is. God's doing it with us, through us, to restore creation that has been fallen and sinful. So Genesis 12, right after Genesis 11, Genesis 11 tells this story, and then it moves, and it tells a little bit more genealogy, and then it moves to this story, which is a contrast story to Genesis 11, and has a different picture. And if you look in your Bible, it might say the call of Abraham. And I want to talk about calling, because a lot of us talk about calling, but what does it mean when we talk about calling? So it starts and said, the Lord had said to Abraham, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land I will show you. Calling is something that somebody else does to you, right? I don't usually say, Steve, would you get some food on the table? I might think it to myself, but it's not really a calling if I'm talking to myself. If Jan says something, it might be a calling. Would you please get up here and help me with this? Right? So you really don't create a calling for yourself. The whole idea of calling is that God says, I want you to do this. I'm calling you. Notice, the first thing is he's calling him into a relationship with Abram, and God have a relationship. God's talking to him. The first calling we have is to get back into relationship with God. Instead of like, I don't want to hear it. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to eat whatever tree I want. Called back into relationship with God is the first calling that we all have. So many callings are general callings to all people, including the call to restore creation, the call to feed each other, the call to serve one another. But he has a specific calling for Abraham here. And he says, leave. And then he says, I will make you. Do you remember what Genesis 11 says? Let us make a name for ourselves. Let us make a tower for ourselves. Let us make a temple for ourselves. Let us do something amazing. So that everyone will say, wow, they are amazing. Look what they built. But this is a calling from God. And you'll notice it says, I will, I will, I will, I will, I will. It's what God does. But he invites Abraham into his creation. And his counter story that's changing the trajectory that was down, down, down so far in the first chapter 3 to 11 of Genesis. I will make you into a great nation. Now, there, God isn't calling Abraham to be a rugged individualist, even though it seems that way. He's calling Abraham. Abraham went with his family. And the idea was to create a family and to create a nation and a kingdom. And we are called together. And we are called in our corporations and in our families and in our churches and in our NGOs and nonprofits or whatever we're doing to do something together. Because that's where the power is. When we work together. I can't do that much by myself. I can't build that much by myself. The Pope contrasts the building of the Tower of Babel with Nehemiah and the story of rebuilding the Temple of Jerusalem, or the walls of Jerusalem. He says, everybody got a section. Nehemiah first prayed and asked God to deal with this problem. And then when the king asked him, what do you want? He prayed quick. So notice it was founded in prayer. Because if you're going to have a calling, it needs to come from God. And you can go to God and say, what do you want me to do? Or you can also just go to God and say, look, I see this problem with my people. I see this sin in myself and my family and my people. Notice that he said that. He didn't just start with, what's wrong with those people? God, take care of them. He said, we have sinned. He repented for 4 months. Cried out to God. And then when he was serving the king, and the king said, what can I do for you? He said, would you give me another job? I'd like to leave the palace and go to where the problems are. One place you'll probably find your calling is going where the problems are. After he went to where the problems were, he did research. Did examination. He looked around at what was happening with all the walls. He called the families together and he listened. He said, what's going on? Tell me what's happening. What's happening? And he'd gotten his news, a little bit of news, but he went there in person to where the problem was. He found out what was really going on. And then he said, let's make a plan. And you take that section, and you take that section, and you take that section, and let's build this together. Each family had a piece. And when there was opposition, they dealt with the opposition mostly with crying out to God. But you see the contrast with Babel, right? Everybody had a place to build this and protect and to care for each other. Anyway, that was where the nation was at that point. So God's building a nation together, not just the elite, the meritocracy in charge, but the meritocracy asking, what's the deal? And going to the issue, not staying in the palace and saying, I hear those Jews out there have some problems. What should we do about that? He went to the problem. That's often where you're going to find a calling. But not just up here, when you're there, listening. Okay, and then he says, I will bless you. I will bless you. It comes from God. Anything we do, any flourishing, any blessing we have comes from God. Yes, he lets us work, but our work will be in vain unless God blesses. And I will make you famous. I will give you a great name. You're not going to make your own logo. You're not going to make your own flag. I will give you a great name. As opposed to the Babylonians, people in Babel were making themselves famous, making their own name. We are the people. We all have that, right? We are the right people. We are the strong people. We are the better people. We are the better corporation, the better church, the stronger, the more successful. No, I will bless you. And in your work, God says, I will bless you. Not just individually, but your corporation. And you should be there helping your corporation, your school, your church, whatever it is, to flourish. I'll bless you and I'll make you famous. You don't have to worry about your position, your prestige, your title on the door or behind your name. I will deal with that. And you will be a blessing to others. You were created to bless God and to bless others. And others were created to bless you. And we do this together, and I drink milk not because I have a cow. Now, in Tanzania, it was more direct. Somebody brought me the bucket from the cow that I knew was down the street, and then we had to boil it. But here we have a whole system that takes care of that. It's pasteurized, and it's wonderful. They even make ice cream. How much better? You will be a blessing to others. Our work is supposed to be a service. And whether that's playing violin or programming or nursing, it's a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. I don't have to protect myself either. I don't have to be afraid. Because God said He'd protect me and us. And all the families on earth will be blessed through you. God's plan is for all the families on the earth to be blessed through you. All the nations, all the ethnicities, all the languages, all the extended families, all the clans to be blessed through His nation, through His people. That's the plan. And He calls someone to do it. And we go on and we see He calls Moses, and then He calls the people of Israel. And then He calls individuals, He calls us together, He calls corporations, He calls schools, He calls nonprofits to be a blessing and to glorify Him. Here's the key thing. So Abraham departed as the Lord instructed. Because you can have a great call and say, that sounds dangerous. That sounds risky. That sounds expensive. I don't know what I'll do if I get away out there with people I don't know at all, and they could kill me, and I don't know. And yeah, you don't know. That's why you trust God. And when you pick a vocation or whatever you're going to study, ask God, what do you want me to study? What do you want me to learn? When you pick a job, what do you want me to do? And first of all, get your heart clear. I'll do whatever you show me. Because if you're just saying, tell me what you want, and then I'll think about it. God's not going to even tell you anything. What's the point? Decide first if I'll do whatever you show me. And also in the day-to-day, what do you want me to do today? I've got the big call. What's today's assignment? So we're called by God to relationship with Him, first of all, but also with others, to be a nation. We're called by God to bless others. Your work should be a blessing to others. Somehow. If you're making furniture, if you're making cars, if you're fixing cars, if you're healing people, if you're sweeping the floor, it should be a blessing to people. And we are called by God to ordinary work. We're called by God in all of our work, but I want to emphasize ordinary. I want to emphasize work with your hands. Paul says, if people aren't working with their hands, tell them they got to work with their hands so they can eat. Because Paul worked with his hands, even though he was a great intellect and a great apostle and a great minister and a great miracle worker, he made tents. It doesn't mean everybody has to make tents. It doesn't mean some people can't do specialization. But all work is a calling by God. All work, well, maybe not all work. I'm not sure prostitution is a calling by God. There's probably some things we could say, yeah, God probably didn't call you that. But almost all work somehow can and should be done to bless somebody else. And can and should be done to glorify God. And it involves service. We do this to serve other people, and it means service is sometimes hard work. It also tends to involve risk and sacrifice, and I got to go out to some place where God's showing me, and I don't know how it's going to work out, and I don't know about this job, and I don't know about that place, but God told me. And God didn't tell me necessarily how it's all going to work out. So I felt a special call from God at camp to do ministry work, and I was back at camp a couple years ago, and I was like, God, at that same altar, said, did you really call me to do this? And I was 12 at the time, and I was 60-something back then. And God said, yes. That's what I felt like. I didn't call you to succeed. I called you to minister. I called you to serve. God may or may not call you to succeed at your work, but he's calling you to serve. And I think Mother Teresa said something the same, I discovered. So, but you do it not for your name, because then it doesn't matter, right? If it isn't about you, then it doesn't really matter that much if it's successful or not. If it isn't about you, it doesn't really matter if your church or your organization or your whatever is successful, right? It's about glorifying God and how you do it especially. Now, most of us are like, well, if you'd make this really successful, then I could say that I got this famous because of Jesus. If I was a star NFL quarterback, I could kneel and say, Jesus did this. Maybe God just wants you to change diapers and glorify God. It depends upon God's blessing. You can't do anything unless God blesses it. You can't grow anything unless God blesses it. You can't build anything unless God blesses it. You can't have any relationship unless God blesses it. Only God is going to make it fruitful. So you're called by God, not just for church work. It's a general calling to have a relationship with him, to restore creation. And there's specific callings that depend upon your giftings that he's given you, the opportunities, the relationships, the things that develop. And some of it's just figuring things out. There isn't even any record of Nehemiah hearing from God that he should do this. He was just praying really hard about it, and then he got this question about, what's wrong, Nehemiah? And he prayed quick, what do I say to the king? He said something, he got an assignment. So let me just explain. These are some ways you can think about calling that might work or not work. This is not a very good picture, but it's you can blame them. It's straight from them. Some of us, and maybe there's a way that you can understand this better. So some of us, it's intrinsic to the work itself. And we say, I am doing this work because God helps me bless people. I do art for kids because I can pour into those kids. In the work itself and within the workplace where I do it. So within the workplace, the location of service is at the workplace, and the work itself is a blessing from God. It utilizes my skills and talents and blesses people. For some people, it's more extrinsic to the work itself, even though it's in the work itself. So I work at McDonald's, but it's not really my work at McDonald's. I'm not so excited about feeding people. I'm excited about the conversations I get to have with the people that are there. Pearlie loves all the conversations, all the hospitality she gets to have with people who come in where she's serving people. And so it's a means of serving people at work, or maybe having a conversation about how people are doing, or maybe even about Jesus. Or maybe it's beyond the workplace. So this work serves the common good because, yeah, I know I'm just putting things together, but eventually this becomes a car, and those people are blessed with that. Or maybe it's something outside of the work. Like, I work hard at this, and I don't love the work, but I make a lot of money, and I get to give it to the church, and then the church gets to do great stuff. Or, so there can be a mix of all those things. But maybe if you feel frustrated, I remember working on the roof. I was called to ministry, but I was roofing. And I was like, what am I doing here? I should be doing, well, I was, of course, paying so I could do volunteer youth work, paying my bills. But also, as long as I abide in God and Jesus and I obey him while I'm on the roof, and I'm blessing people with the roof. Anyways, help God to help you think about the ways you can do things at work. I don't have time to talk more about that, but intrinsic value of the work. Continue to create things like God does. You can be pulling weeds in your work. Some of you are fixing things that are broken. Some of you are creating new things. Your work might be more of one or the other. And some of it is transforming toil, and you're seeing the benefit, and you're being shaped by this work to be a particular kind of person who's a better kind of person, who can do more things, or who just is a better character of person. The extrinsic value, you value hard work and integrity. These are, again, from these guys. Seeing others as image bearers and building character. We are built, Romans 5 talks about how hard things build our character, give us perseverance, and build us into character and give us hope. And 2 Corinthians 12, 9 and 10 talks about how my weaknesses and my thorns are where God's power is displayed. He builds character. So we're working with God to restore creation. And Jesus makes work fruitful, not fruitless. John 15 says that when we abide in Jesus, when we stay connected, when we're abiding, even when we're on the roof or we're doing something that seems menial, God can create a fruit out of that, fruit of justice, fruit of love, fruit that blesses others. Jesus makes work purposeful and not pointless. 1 Corinthians 15, Ecclesiastes says, what's the point of this? It just all is going to go away because we're going to die. But 1 Corinthians 15 says, no, we are going to be resurrected. Death is not the end, and therefore, nothing you do for the Lord is worthless. And sometimes we read that and say, nothing I do at church is worthless. No, nothing you do anywhere, if you're doing it for Jesus, is worthless. God will resurrect it in our new bodies in the new earth. And we serve the common good. We serve what other people need, not just for myself, not just to serve myself. I'm helping other people. And I'm glorifying God, lifting up his name. Jesus is glorified, not my name, my brand, wow, you're a great guy. And then finally, Jesus is going to take it all into a new creation. This is my new creation with AI. Not really accurate, but a try. So, and you notice people are working in the garden with the tree of life and the waters that are creating flourishing. So when we get to work in that garden, in that city, wow, that's going to be amazing. And one of Tim Keller's favorite stories is Leaf by Nagel, when J.R. Tolkien was feeling like he wasn't getting anything done. He told this story about Nagel making all he could manage was a leaf in his time before he died. But then he got to creation and he saw there was the tree on the hillside that he had in his mind, but he couldn't get out of his pen. God's going to take our work, and he's going to use that work, that seed we plant now, and he's going to resurrect it into something amazing that doesn't have thorns. And he's going to make us into somebody amazing who can work in that environment that's been created out of all the stuff we've done. So, just a reminder to slaves, obey your earthly masters and everything, and do it. Now, again, I'm not going to get into slavery and everything, but do it as unto the Lord and not just for their eye on you to curry favor with, but in sincerity of heart with reverence for the Lord. So even the work of a slave could be done to glorify God. And he was addressing slaves because they're moral, intelligent people who can do things. Other people didn't think that. There was a lot of meritocracy then. They weren't philosophers, they were slaves. He said, what you do can be done to the Lord. Even when it's an awful master, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance in the end from the Lord as your reward. Even if your work right now is awful, how you do it will be rewarded. Because it's the Lord Christ you are serving. And then he goes on and says, and masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Now that's a revolutionary one. Bosses, treat your employees in the same way, with the same respect, making sure they flourish. But this wasn't even bosses, this was masters. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven. There's no favoritism with him. God doesn't care if you're the slave or the master. He expects you to love, and he can see the glory that you're given, and he's going to give you an inheritance. And we have no idea who's going to have the biggest reward. It may not be the CEO. It might be the person who worked faithfully on the line. And God knows. Somebody's got to be CEO and somebody's got to work on the line. But God is going to reward it properly, and he's going to make it all happen. So let's pray as the worship team comes. Lord, we have so many questions. And we want to follow you together in our work this week. Not just as individuals. We want to know how to follow you, to do our work for your glory. To do our work out of love for others. And Lord, sometimes our work is super frustrating. And it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. And everything just doesn't do what we hope it'll do. And sometimes we wish we had other work. And sometimes our coworkers are frustrating. Our bosses are frustrating. People who work under us are frustrating. Lord, you know all of that. And you came to chisel stones for 30 years. And then you started chiseling living stones. And then you started building a temple that glorifies you. And the foundation stones of that city are the 12 disciples that you called. So, Lord, we want to fit in to that city. We want to be your citizens, your children, your temple that holds your presence when we're at work. We want to glorify you in all that we do. And God, we don't really know how that all works. And Lord, forgive us for the ways that we idolize our work, identify ourselves with our title or our ministry. Lord, you are the one who gives us worth. And we want to give you worth by what we do and who we are and how we relate. We confess that we can't do any of that. We ask that you would bless us and make us a blessing. Jesus, I pray that you would speak the specific word to each of us that we need to hear for this day and this week. How can we serve you? How can we hear your call and obey in the challenges of this week? In the work we do this week? Thank you for sanctifying and blessing all of our work. May we do it all for your glory. As we love you and we love others, as a house of prayer for all nations, may we do everything out of love.